Alright, hi guys, welcome to my second edition of my Big Ten Power Rankings. We're a couple of weeks into the season, and the start of Big Ten Conference play is upon us. It opens with Penn State hosting Wisconsin Thursday night, Halloween, and then they'll finish it on Friday night. And there are a bunch of other series. A couple notes before I get started. There isn't going to be a ton of biographical information, kind of covering the basics, since I did look at that in my first power ranking. This week I'm going to be primarily talking about which players have been doing well, recent team performance, and things like that. Also, I've mostly been watching Wisconsin, Penn State, Notre Dame, and Minnesota, but I've watched a little bit of every team so far, and I've been paying attention to every game. Here are my predictions for the weekend before we get into it. Notre Dame sweeps at Minnesota, Wisconsin splits at Penn State, Michigan splits at Ohio State, Michigan State hosts Cornell and splits. This week I'm going to start off with the rankings before I talk about each team individually. I'm also going to start putting the teams into tiers that I think help explain where I think they're at. Tier 1 teams would be teams I think are kind of the best in the country. Tier 2 are kind of middle of the pack type teams. And Tier 3 would consist of teams that I think aren't very good. So I've also included 0.5 tiers to show teams that I think are looking like they float between. Before I get into the tiers, here's the rankings. Number 1, Notre Dame, last ranked at number 2. Number 2, Wisconsin, last ranked at number 4. Number 3, Ohio State, no change. Number 4, Penn State, last ranked at number 1. Number 5, Michigan, no change. Number 6, Minnesota, no change. Number 7, Michigan State, no change. Tier 1, I just have one team, Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame has carved out a spot for itself. Part of that is they've played one less series. They had a break in between. They've had less chances to lose, less quality opponents than some other teams in the conference. But I don't think they've had an easy game this year, and they've showed up in all of them. They're 4-0. So I'll go into them in more detail after the ranking, but I thought the team would be good, and they look good. Tier 1.5. I call this tier 1.5 because I think these teams are kind of tweeners to be candidates for number 1, but aren't quite there. I have Wisconsin, Ohio State, and Penn State. I could see the argument for any of these teams to be between 2 and 4, but for now I think they're all kind of tied. Tier 2. I call Tier 2 the teams that are kind of looking like middle of the pack. I just have Michigan. I think Michigan has proved enough to say that they are probably an upper half team in this conference at their best. They still have some warts, which I'm going to get into, but on the other hand, I didn't expect the goaltending and the team defense in general to be as consistent as it has been early on, especially having lost what they did. They look a lot better than I had anticipated. Tier 2.5. These are teams that aren't quite Tier 3, but they look like they're just below sort of middle. I have Minnesota and Michigan State. Minnesota looks kind of as expected. It's a new team with some new faces and some familiar faces that are doing well. I think they have potential, but for now they look like they're probably going to be a bottom half team. And then Michigan State, on the other hand, isn't as bad as I thought they could be. They've started at 500 already, and they have a big test against Cornell this weekend. Both teams have big tests. Minnesota hosts Notre Dame and Mariucci. So we'll get right into the rankings. Notre Dame, number 1. They're 4-0 at home. They look good in both sweeps. Some notes on this team. Freshman Ryan Bischel in net has played 3 of 4 games to start the year, and his numbers are the best in the team through that. He's only allowed 6 goals with a .929 save percentage. It's kind of cool also for me. I had Ryan on my summer team a couple years ago, so that's kind of fun to see. Cale Morris, who is expected to be the big workhorse in net, actually allowed 4 in their most recent win against Lake State. I assume they're trying to keep him fresh or something for the start of the season. But yeah, Ryan Bischel seems to be having a great start. They're also outscoring opponents 10-3 in the third period, 6-1 in the second periods. They haven't really played amazing opponents, Air Force and Lake State, but it's a pretty good start. Some other outliers, Mike O'Leary has a 36% shooting percentage. Jake Pavanka, a sophomore, is off to a hot start with a point per game. The power play is scoring at 33%, and the PK is about 90%. Another note, a guy that they really want to be big this year, Michael Graham, has 0 goals, 2 assists, 2 shots, and he wasn't in the lineup for their last game. So that's kind of something to watch. I think that's going to be... They want to have Michael Graham, obviously, so we'll see how that plays out. This week they play at Minnesota. I'm picking them to sweep on the road. Okay, number 2, Wisconsin. This is the team I was most excited to watch this year just because they have a lot of new talent coming in and they basically revamped their whole team. I've watched all last 5 of their games, and I'm going to talk a lot about them just because I obviously have a lot of different thoughts on them. Over their last 4 games, they're outscoring opponents 13-10. They had a great comeback to stave off the rally against Clarkson at home, despite reports that there was an illness going around the team. They didn't have Alex Turcotte for those games. Due to that, they were still able to manage a split. Prior to that, they had a quality sweep of Duluth at home. This looks like a pretty good team. Like I said, I've watched a lot of these games. I think they're already getting some love in the sense that they've been ranked top 7 in the USCHO polls the last 2 weeks. I'm not sure if they really are going to be a top 5 caliber team just yet, but obviously time will tell. They've got some big tests in the coming weeks. They start the season tonight at Penn State in a Thursday-Friday series, which will be on the Big Ten Network. I've already put down a few of my thoughts on this team after the Duluth series, as well as recapping a lot of the other Big Ten teams, but I'll talk about them a bit more. Cole Caulfield has over a goal per game to start the year. He started to cool down a little bit recently, but then he picked it up again. I do think he's going to maintain that pace this year. He might even pick it up as the season goes on. They also looked good, even without Alex Turcotte, who has been really strong to start the year, at about a point per game. And he's also making an impact off the score sheet. One player who's really delivered early on is Roman Oshin, who is tied with Caulfield for the team lead in points. Roman is a great player. I watched his brother Jack a lot when he was in high school, and he's a hell of a player too. He's a captain at St. Cloud State. I'm not too surprised to see that Roman has emerged in a big way for this team. He was pretty good as a freshman last year. He plays a bit like Jack, his brother. They're both undersized, but they play big, really compete hard. So it's cool to see him get rewarded offensively. He's the type of player I wouldn't be surprised to see him wear the C for Wisconsin as an upperclassman. He sets a good pace, compete level. Oshin got more time this past weekend with Turcotte out, but even with Turcotte in the lineup, he's done pretty well. He's a team leading plus 11, which is pretty telling. Another player who has done great is Owen Lindmark. He was the hero to close out the Clarkson series. I've said it a few times already. I think Lindmark, along with Ryder Donovan, are low-key some of the best recruits in the conference this year. In Lindmark's case, he's a two-way guy with some sneaky offense. When Turcotte, Caulfield move on, whether that's next year or later on, him and Ryder Donovan project to be pretty major parts of this team. The fact that Lindmark basically already is bodes really well. He has 7 points and 4 goals through 6 games. Obviously, he came up with a big one last weekend with 7 seconds left, finding ways to score goals. He's been great in the penalty kill. Speaking of goals, he got a couple of shorthanded ones already. He's just behind Oshin, second highest plus-minus on the team with 6. Ty Pelton-Bice is another new face I had highlighted who is going to be a big piece. He's stepped right into the team as well. On the back end, the defense has been just okay. I would say that that's probably the weakness of this team is team defense. Not that it's been terrible, but if there is a weakness, that's what it is. It hasn't impressed me nearly as much as the offensive side. I also think things are different now that they have so much talent up front. The defense have a different role than they did last year. The forward group looks pretty cohesive. Meanwhile, the kind of individual defensemen are all pretty good players in their own right, but as a group, they haven't killed it. Keandre Miller, who torched his start last year, has 3 goals in his first 6 games, which is still good for a defenseman, but those are all of his points, and then he has a -4 rating, so that's definitely a step back from how he started. And it was a significantly worse team last year, and he played a different role. So I wouldn't say that I'm singling him out as much worse. It's just a different kind of configuration, but you obviously want to see the minuses not be there. Jack Gorniak, speaking of minuses, he went in the draft last year in the middle rounds, solid freshman year, but he has no points and a -6 rating, which is kind of bizarre. He went even in the Duluth series, which is their biggest test. Arguably, Clarkson was a big test too. so maybe he was sick or something, I'm not sure, against Clarkson. One guy who has benefited a lot from the influx of talent is Linus Weissbach. He has 8 points, 7 assists. I think as teams work to cover Caulfield more and more, he already has benefited and is going to continue to benefit a lot from that. Caulfield knows how to move the puck, not just shoot it. Both guys can set up plays, shoot it themselves. Another upperclassman who's had a pretty good start is Sean Doogie. He's not been super offensive. I mean, he has a couple points, but just over the sheet, he's looked pretty good. Dylan Holloway, who is the only real draft prospect of the conference this year, has also had a pretty good start. I think he's looked pretty good on the puck. He had a really nice primary assist in the Duluth series. He's got, I think, 3 points. I think he's going to get better and better. Even in just the 5 games I've seen, he seems to continue to improve. It's not all going to be great, especially early on, but it's very hard to come right into big-time college hockey, and he's done very well for himself. Penn State series, I think, is going to be interesting because they're a hard team to defend against, but they'll also give up some opportunities because of the way that they play. So we'll see if he can capitalize on that. He certainly has players to play with, depending on however they set up the lineup. One last player I'd like to highlight is goaltender Dan Lebedev as a sophomore. He was a workhorse as a freshman. It looks like that's going to continue. He's played all but 15 minutes this season. He's doing fairly well. First weekend of the season, he gave up 8 goals. Then last weekend, he gave up 7 goals. Doesn't sound like he's playing that well. But the fact that guys were sick last weekend and they still came out with a split against a good team, I think, this defense does give up a decent amount, all things considered. They kind of remind me of Penn State in that they do give up their fair share of chances. And he did very well against Duluth. Lebedev did in net. So I generally think that he's given them a chance to win most nights. I don't think he's going to be a major weakness, but we will see. I've definitely spoken to some people around the game who still doubt Lebedev, but I think that he's shown enough that it's not something that you can hit this team for. Like I said, for Holloway, this team as a whole, the Penn State series is going to be big, for Lebedev especially, because there's basically no chance that he's going to have a shutout or an easy time with those 2 games. And meanwhile, Penn State has a lot to prove, as it will be the first really good opponent they face this year, and it's going to be at home for them. So that's going to be an exciting series. I think that's definitely worth watching. And yeah, Wisconsin's already moved up 2 spots. At 3, I have Ohio State. Ohio State were 3 last time, so no real change. It was kind of a cross between them and Penn State. They started off their season with a win at the Icebreaker tournament. They showed some bend but didn't break. They ended up beating Western and then RIT in the championship. Then the weekend after that, they split at home against Omaha. Both were 1-goal games. Then they swept Mercyhurst pretty decidedly. So I think they're off to a good start. Some of my notes: Gustav Westland has 8 points in 6 games, including 4 goals, 1 coming on the power play. Tanner Lazinski is right there, but just 1 goal to go with 6 assists. I think Westland scoring so much to start the year is a huge key to this season. They need him to be big if they want to have success, considering the caliber of scorer they lost in Mason Jobst and some of the other guys. Speaking of scoring, Wyatt Egie on defense has 3 goals to start the year, 2 on the power play to go with 3 assists for a point per game pace. Despite all that, he's only a +1, which is interesting. Power play has gone 27%, and they are 90% on the kill. This is another team that has some solid secondary scoring early on. 11 skaters have 2 points to start the year. 7 skaters have 4 points or more. The offense, which is kind of looks new, seems fairly balanced. They're getting a good amount from the defensemen. Like I said, Wyatt Egie, but also Matt Miller started the year very strong. Has 5 points in 4 games so far. Miller missed a chance to pick up some points in the Mercyhurst series where they outscored the Lakers 10-3. If he's still out this weekend, it'll make the chance of splitting or sweeping Michigan at home that much harder. Like Michigan, the Buckeyes have a goaltender off to a very strong start. Tommy Napier has played every minute this year through 3 back-to-backs with a 1.66 goals against average and a .940 save percentage. I was wondering if he would fall off a bit after splitting most games with Sean Romeo last year, but he seems really up to the task. He started the season off with 2 big results at the Icebreaker, and his defense has obviously kept opponents to minimal goals since then. So I'm sure it's not all him, but he's certainly done his part. We'll see how that holds up in the offense-friendly Big Ten over the coming months. But so far, so good. They host Michigan. I think it's like a 70% chance to be a split, but I would give the edge to Ohio State, especially at home, if one team is going to sweep. The vitals just overall seem to be a bit better for Ohio State, from scoring to depth to goaltending. They look like a pretty good team to start the year. I think they're quietly lurking. I think this could be another year that they start to make a run towards the tournament. Penn State is the biggest dropper. They went from number 1 in my kind of preseason rankings to number 4 now. That number 4 kind of comes with an asterisk in that it could be 2, 3, 4. Realistically, this is one of those teams where if you could take away one game, their schedule looks a lot better. But there are still some question marks in this team. I'll get into them. I'll probably be focusing a little bit more on the negatives because I've dropped them a good amount. They went from number 1 to basically bottom half. So I'll talk about that. But here are some of the underlying numbers. They're outscoring opponents, outshooting opponents by a fairly wide margin. Power play is at 24%. PK is at over 90%. I know they haven't had that kind of bang that we would have expected, but this is one of those teams where if you take out, like I said, that second game against Fairbanks, where they got shocked, everything seems all right. So let's get the negatives out of the way. Evan Barrett is snake-bitten, 0 goals on 18 shots, 4 assists in 5 games. Luckily, the other top scorers on this team are doing well. I think they've been playing around with the lines a little bit. We might see the Limoges-Barrett-Folks line get reunited, but we've seen a lot of Biro, Sassis, Talvidia, and another guy I've been really impressed with to start the year is freshman Connor McEachern. They haven't really played any big games, so I almost wonder if they haven't played down to their opponents, or maybe just been frustrated when they haven't gotten the kind of dominance that they expected. But Connor McEachern is a guy, I think most shifts that I see him, he doesn't look too much like a freshman. He is 20 years old, so maybe he shouldn't, but he did very well in junior hockey offensively the last couple of years, and he's really looking the part early on. So while that top unit of Barrett, Limoges folks hasn't produced a ton for them, Biro and Sassis are doing very well. McEachern seems to look like a scorer, and the depth scoring overall should come through. Before long, you have to figure Barrett, Limoges folks are going to start to put up numbers. Defensively, Cole Holtz started putting up numbers early. He had a 4-goal weekend to start the year with a hat trick in the first game against Sacred Heart. He continues to rack up pluses like he did last year. Another freshman, Mason Snell, has seemed to step right in for this group. Clayton Phillips, new face but not a freshman, I think he's a junior, also seems to be very well suited to the Penn State system with good skating, puck-moving type. So things are going well. They look pretty good. The offense hasn't been as dynamic as you might think, but I think the indicators are that they're going to figure it out. It is still very early. I just think it's super impressive. Nate Sassis has nearly half of his career best 19 assists through his first 5 games, with 9. Maybe that production is going to come back to earth, especially once they play better teams, but it might not come back to earth that much. I think he's a great college player, and he's probably going to put up big numbers this year. In net, Peyton Jones has a .939 save percentage through 3 games. Oscar Oshio has had 1 game, and that was that stinker second game against Alaska Fairbanks. So I think a lot of the underlying indicators on this team look pretty good. And yeah, we'll see. They host Wisconsin. I think it's probably going to be a split, but it could really go anyway. Number 5, I have Michigan. I put Michigan in a tier above the bottom 2 teams because I do think that they've showed a good amount this year. There are still some question marks. Their last 4, they're 3-1, outscoring opponents 13-7. They lost to an undermanned Western Michigan team that had no Matthias Samuelson and no Wade Allison, which are some big pieces to not have, and still split. But this is also a team with a bunch of new faces, and they're figuring out their new kind of configuration. Power play is 5 for 30, so 17%. Not quite as good as you want to see, but Cam York was out for a couple of games, and I'll talk about that a bit more. They have 34 shots in those 30 power plays. I figure some of them are negated by coinciding power plays and penalties, but who knows? PK is 20 for 23. The offense started to spark up before the 4-1 loss at Western Michigan, closing out last weekend's home and home. Some big positives. Jack Becker and Johnny Beecher have jumped right in offensively this year, playing on kind of depth lines. I don't know how much they really are depth lines. I think Becker's numbers are going to normalize a little bit, whereas I think Beecher is going to continue to come on strong, especially if he moves up the lineup through his current line. It seems to be all right. I think his current situation, he's playing with Becker, who is also a Bruins pick from 2015, another big guy. They've been surprisingly good offensively. Will Lockwood has been surprisingly weak. 3 goals in 6 games, definitely less than you would expect. Same goes for Jake Slaker and Mike Pasterjov. They've played 5 of 6 games, and they have 2 assists each. Nick Blankenberg, who was kind of a surprise last year when they already had a superstar offensive defenseman in Quinn Hughes. Blankenberg is a forward turned defense, who I don't know if he was a particularly highly touted recruit. He just kind of came to it very quickly, and he's already producing on the back end. He got some good power play time before Cam York came back. And obviously, it's great news that Cam York has come back. He has 3 assists in 3 games, a team-leading +3 rating, and looks pretty solid early on the top pair. 13 skaters have 2 points through 6 games, which is a great sign for this team, even though the big guns aren't quite firing. You have to figure that they're going to get back to form. Things are looking up on the whole. One big last positive. I really thought goaltending would be an issue last year for a variety of reasons. I didn't think it was great last year. Then they lost Josh Norris, who they did lose him for half the year, so that's probably why it didn't look great. But they also lost the top pairing of Quinn Hughes and Joe Ciccone, which was like one guy who drives play and another guy who's really tough to play against. So I just think that there were a lot of reasons to think that the goaltending was going to go back, but it hasn't. Strauss-Mann has played pretty much every minute, and he has a 1.82 goals against average with a nearly .930 save percentage, playing every minute this season. That includes playing Western Michigan in the final game of their last series, where they had 4 goals scored against. So more than anything, I'm impressed that he's been able to hold up. Playing back-to-back every night is a testament to the strong start for this team and the defense in the whole playing well, despite losing, like I said, a couple top-level players from last season. I think part of the fact is that they've spread around the scoring lines. Like I said, Beecher's been able to score on what looks like a depth line, and it's made all 4 forward lines of this team tougher to play against when you have that kind of spread out scoring. They play at Ohio State this week. I think that they're most likely to split that, but they could get swept. It's kind of 2 similar teams. We'll see how it matches up. Number 6, Minnesota. Minnesota I've watched a bunch this year. Like Wisconsin, they brought in a bunch of new freshmen. Well, like a lot of this conference, they've brought in a bunch of new freshmen, and it's been interesting. I don't think it's looked amazing, but they've had a solid start. They split at Colorado College. They swept Niagara at home. Then they got swept by Duluth, which was a home and home. They were outscored 7-2 by Duluth. Definitely looks like there is still plenty of room to grow for this team, which, to be fair, is how they looked against Niagara as well, despite sweeping. I said it before, I think this team's going to have an adjustment period. It's October. They lost a lot to graduation and pro hockey. They brought in a lot of talent, but most of them are young. Not surprisingly, the freshman who has impressed me the most is Ben Myers, especially last weekend. He came in on a pretty good timeline. He got a lot of confidence and preparation in junior hockey. Prior to that, he finished his time and was dominant in high school. So he's coming into college hockey on a really nice curve. He seems like a potentially awesome fit on that top line with Sam Walker and Blake McLaughlin, which is great. I think they need to keep a line like that together so that they have a true scoring line, and hopefully they could ride them to a lot of goals this year. Defensively, they look okay. Ryan Johnson and Jackson Lacombe, both freshmen. They have the occasional freshman moment, but they also show a ton of skill and ability, as expected, but it's still good to see. They were both pretty high draft picks, but it's still super impressive when a guy can come in and play pretty well early on. Guys like them and Ben Myers are why I think this team is pretty well positioned for next year and the years to come generally. I mentioned Notre Dame and how I think they're favorites to sweep on the road. I still think that, it could certainly be a split, but I don't think this team is able to string together 2 wins against a really good team at this point of the year. The goaltending has been fine. We could say good, not great. I certainly wouldn't blame any of the results so far this year on goaltending alone. And same goes for the goaltending as with the new skaters. I think with 3 guys who could play this year in the net, it will be a year to develop and figure out who the man is going into what will hopefully be a big year next season. I'm not writing this year off, but I would say 500 is probably a good goal for this team, and then try to make it into the tournament somehow. As far as who's playing really well, I would just single out Sammy Walker alongside Blake McLaughlin. They've been pretty good, and Walker has scored some big goals. Walker kind of reminds me of Cale Makar from UMass last season in the sense that he can just have this highlight moment where he'll cut through a guy and score a beautiful goal, which is always nice to have. Obviously, he's not a defenseman like Cale Makar is. As I said, Myers has done fairly well, especially for freshmen. I do hope he stays on that top line. He's a good player. He adds another goal-scoring threat to those two. He's got a good stick. I think most of the team is playing all right, but you need some more guys past Walker and McLaughlin to start killing it if they want to have a great year. They certainly have the talent. It will probably be McManus and Sampo Ranta in the short term who do some damage. Maybe Nathan Burke, who played with Walker and McLaughlin last year, will end up with them again. Not sure. We'll see. One thing to note is the whole defensive group are minuses, except for Matt Stodiker, who is a +3 as a freshman. He was relatively unheralded behind other freshman defenders, but he's always been a good player. Seems like a good piece for this team early on. They need guys like him, arguably as much as they need the more flashy types. He'll probably stay for a while, too, on campus. He has 2 points to start the year, too, so it's not like he can't produce, but I don't think that they're expecting him to be a big offensive guy. They have other players for that. 13 players have at least 2 points to start the year. The power play is only at 17%, while the penalty kill is doing all right at 85%. I mentioned all 3 goaltenders. They've played a bit, but Mo and LaFontaine have played the most, with Jared Mo putting up much better numbers with 1 less game started. Mo has a .923 save percentage and 2.01 goals against, while LaFontaine has a 3.43 goals against average with an .878 save percentage. I wouldn't say the numbers reflect that LaFontaine has played poorly. He's been alright from what I've seen. He's played a bit more as well. Mo only allowed 1 against Duluth, though, which is a big credit to him. And obviously also the team defense as a whole. They stayed pretty close to Duluth in shots in that first game, and the game was much better than the second on the whole. Minnesota are the youngest team in college hockey, to my knowledge. They're probably going to have a tough time replicating those same efforts and results on night 2 of a given series, especially early on the road against the Duluth team who were coming off being swept by Wisconsin. So that was a tough matchup. So yeah, that's Minnesota. They'll host Notre Dame. I think they're probably going to get swept, but we'll see. Michigan State at 7. They're kind of tied with Minnesota here. I think that this team is better than a 7 team in most conferences is, or the last team in most conferences are. Looking a couple notes to start the year. Gianluca Esteves already has matched his career high 3 points as a freshman through 3 games this year, and he has a team leading +4, which is interesting. They definitely need some guys to start stepping up, and that looks like a good start. Swiss freshman forward Nicholas Mueller has come in, gotten a lot of time. He's another one of those 20-year-old freshmen who looks the part early. They had him with Kodorenko and Mitchell Lewandowski to start the season, which is a great spot to be in as a freshman. Recently, they split up those guys, specifically Kodorenko and Lewandowski, and that produced a 5-goal result in the second game against Colorado College. I had a feeling early on that they might split up this group because if you put them in the same line, it's not quite like what they had last year with Taro Hirose centering them. But if they can get it going with other players, then you have a couple lines that can be dangerous. Kodorenko and Lewandowski obviously look good together, but they can make a lot of plays and produce well on their own, especially with some good players that they have in this team. The defense has also started to produce. That's a great sign. 11 players in this team have at least 2 points through 4 games, which is a good sign. Both goalies have played. John Letherman has a .940 save percentage, which is much better than Drew Ritter's. I just think there's a lot of indicators that this team is better than they look as a last place team in the conference last year who lost a lot. They'll play Cornell this week, who are starting their season with a lot to prove, one of the top ranked teams in the country. That's at home. I think they can take a split. I wouldn't be surprised at getting swept, and it wouldn't change my opinion too much of this team. Obviously, Cornell is pretty highly regarded. I haven't seen them much. I watched them play the U18 national team a bit last weekend, and they looked fairly solid, but I was mostly paying attention to the national team players. So it'll be interesting to see how this series goes. And that is my second edition of Power Rankings. I hope you liked it. If you have any questions or things you'd like me to talk about in future podcasts or Power Rankings, feel free to send them to me, and I will try to do my best. Thanks.